today's meeting, but
PJs.
Yeah.
I'll text him if you want to. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we get moving because it's already 10 after, so I don't have my
On? Is that on? Yes. Yes? Okay, good. Welcome back to the meeting. It's the same meeting, different day. So we were on, I'm not calling it to order really, but I am going to note that Mary Ann has reconvened and Mary Ann has left the meeting. And Dawn is not quite here yet. And we have 4 people on the Zoom room so far. So we had concluded item, let's call it 4A, which was to discuss the landscape ordinance direction and confer with the landscape architect, and we focused entirely on that at the beginning of the meeting. And now we're going to the next item, which I'm calling 4B, which is to discuss and provide recommendations to optimize the design guideline accessibility by integrating the 6 organizational principles that we all discussed a few meetings ago into the subtopics of the existing regulatory guidelines, because we don't yet have a draft of the upcoming one, but this whole exercise could be, modified, obviously, with that updated information at some later date. So, just so the public understands what we did here is originally when Nori was kind enough to share a very rough draft of his outline, we took, because an outline is about structuring a document, this was I think back in December, as the 5 of us in the public and Brandon talked about how we could encapsulate the main principles into sentences that are things people might be able to remember, because we're trying to actually get this document to be used more and understood and appreciated by more and more people, just like we all appreciate it here in this room. And we came up with 6 that probably still need tweaking here and there. I've gotten some feedback on that, little words here and there, but they're very important, so we want them to be very good. And then we, this month, are going through the exercise of seeing if you take all the information that's in the guidelines now, you can't take all of it, but sort of the subtopics and the way that it relates to various concepts, can we integrate the principles either into the subtopics or vice versa, or both? So can the subtopics actually be categorized under these 6 principles, or can the 6 principles appear where they need to appear throughout the document? We just want someone, for example, who's very interested in, what would you say, complying with the 6 principles. Like, I believe in the health of the forest. I've moved to California from Texas. I love it because of the forest. I want to preserve the forest. Where do I go in this document to know what I need to do to preserve the forest? So that's the general idea of making it accessible. So I asked the group to do the exercise of distributing these documents. We actually had a member of the public do it, which I think Doug made copies of and put it up there if anyone's interested. I now have a copy. I have not seen this. I've seen this, but I have not seen the work, because of the Brown Act, of any of my fellow committee members. So Melanie also has done the exercise and given it to me just now. And you also have copies of it, I think, out there. And then Dawn, we don't have yet, and Marianne's absent. So what I'm going to do, Melanie, is put you on the spot, I think. And I don't see, the person who submitted it from the public is not present yet. So if she joins us later, then I'll sort of ask her if she wants to weigh in. Oh, but before, so you're pre-warned, Melanie, that you're up. But I do want to take comments from the public before we get started on this topic, if anyone has anything on this item 4B to discuss or to comment on or to question.
Well, I think I got two things to say. One is that I don't know if anybody's had a chance to thank you folks for taking the time out of your lives to do this. This is going to be a long-lasting project, and you ought to be thanked. You ought to thank staff and you for doing that. Sorry that we were missing two, but they'll get the word. The other thing I asked was a question at Tuesday's meeting, and probably the wrong place to do it. But the question is I have is, and Nori's submittal to the planning department, has this committee had a chance to look at his submittal as he sent it, not abridged or changed, but because you are the closest thing we have to representing the public in terms of this whole process. We'll end up going probably to planning commission meetings and other meetings, but this committee is the one that is we're relying on, the public is relying on of doing the job. So the question is, will you have a chance, or have you had a chance to look at the raw material that was provided to the city? And if so, I know Brandon's probably got an answer when. Some of us like to know when we can depend on knowing what he's recommending. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think I would normally say that would be under items not on the agenda, but actually it is relevant for this exercise because we didn't have access to what the subtopics would be for the coming regulatory document. All we have is what was done 20 years ago. But I know that this is a process that, has been, controversial for how it was set up. And various folks have various reasons for doing it the way they want to do it. But to answer your question of whether we've seen the raw documents, we have not. Brandon and I have talked about this a fair amount. He can, if you'd like, if you want to, Brandon, explain why, you've set it up the way you have.
Sure. I can do it now if you want, Madam Chair. I know we have an agenda item about an update on consultant staff and work products. I mean, we can do a little bit now, a little bit then if you want. If you think that helps with the conversation, it's up to you.
Are you able to stick around, Mr. Mayor White, for the meeting? Because I think it is part of a larger discussion about the work product. It also relates to our exercise, but it's really more part of the. Are you able to stay?
How long are you talking?
It's usually an hour and a half meeting, maybe 2. You can wait. Okay. So let's.
I don't mind if you want. It's up to you, really.
I know, but I do think it relates
Yeah.
to all. Just you're right. It relates to 5 also, and so it'd be better to throw it in there. So let's start with what we have, and now, unless there's any other comments from the public or questions, anybody on the Zoom room that has a hand up? I'm looking over at Don's screen. I don't see anybody.
I did just get a message from Don that he's running a little bit late.
Okay,
so he
thank
will
you.
be here.
Okay. All right, so let's, Melanie, you're yes, okay, come on up, David, sorry. Just under the wire.
Hi, I'm David O'Neill. Thank you for your service and everything. Really appreciate it. Is it possible to set up where we can ask questions at the end of these meetings too for what has been discussed?
Yeah, I mean, we can now, there's no reason why we can't open it back up to the public. Do you want to write after this group or after the whole meeting?
I think after the whole meeting,
Okay.
so that way if we've made any notes or have any questions.
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you, and remind me if I forget, David, okay? Just high sign.
Got it.
Okay. Melanie?
I was just wondering, can we start off our meetings with questions or comments from the committee? Can we insert that in the agenda, Brandon? Because
well, we had that at the beginning of, just sorry to interrupt, but we had that at the beginning. This is a continued meeting.
Right. But I'm just saying, even though it's continued, we can't make, for instance, if we were at a regular meeting or at this meeting, could we have an item on the agenda where the committee can make comments or ask questions of Brandon, which may or may not be, which would not probably be on the agenda?
Well, let me ask you this, Melanie. You have these 2 very general items on the agenda coming up, and I'll just read them for the public. One is number 5, receive update on consultant and staff work products. It's a fairly general topic. And then number 6 is upcoming agenda items, which since we're not going to, whatever you have on your mind, we're not going to, it's not going to be an agenda item for today, but it could be discussed or previewed as, is that enough
Okay.
of a window for those
Well,
two?
Yeah, for today.
Okay, for
But I
today.
would just like to see, Brandon, can you just put, let's see, after public comments, committee comments?
So we do have, I think with the chairs, we do have announcements as a regular programmed item, so you want to add something in addition to
No,
announcements?
just but clarify that announcements.
Can be any
Can be a
topic.
broad range of
Sure.
Yeah.
things, just, put in parentheses,
Non-agenda or agenda?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
We just call it
overall.
announcements and committee questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, questions or comments.
Because we can't, I think to the point of the Brown Act, we couldn't just say general conversation and go, on a deep dive down a topic that isn't on the agenda. That's really what future agenda items is for, is to put
Yeah.
something on we want to talk about. But yeah, announcements and questions, I mean, if the chair and the vice chair are open to adding that, because really they're, we work together, the committee sets their agenda. And so
Yeah, you can direct I'm the complaint department for the agenda. So, but no, I really think that what's confusing today is this is the same meeting.
Yeah.
We've
Right.
just
And we
continued
can
it.
reopen item number 3. If the chair wants to reopen item number 3,
Yes, I could,
that's totally fine.
which is announcements. Or do you want to wait till, like I asked Ken to do you want to wait till the
Yeah,
end of the meeting?
I can wait. I think we
Okay.
really should get into the meat
All right, let's
of
go.
this.
Then that's putting
Okay.
yourself on the spot. You're
Fine,
on the
thank
spot,
you, but
Melanie.
then tell me how you want to do.
Okay, so what, again, for folks following along at home or in the room here, we have our 6 sentences, basically, that are our principles that we are, at least provisionally, enthusiastic about as a way to order our thinking and of how to access this document. I gave an example to the group and to the public of, with the computer just rearranging the subtopics and putting them under, just kind of a gut feeling of what they most relate to. I'm going to read again for us, if I can dig it out here, the principles, because they're fairly simple and they're meant to be understood and remembered. Number 1 so far is something about the forest, so it's restore and enhance the forest in all improvement projects, private, public, and otherwise. Number 2 is subordinate every built structure to the character of the forest, natural environment, and to the natural features of its own site. Number 3 is to keep every built structure modest and simple, and there's some controversy about the word simple that we're going to talk about at some point. Number 4 is retain and build upon Carmel's official, or that could be another word, established architectural heritage. Number 5 is to fit every built structure within its neighborhood context. And number 6 is to design every property with authentic and consistent details. So that's boiling the whole sort of vision of the community down into 6 principles. Always open to hearing if people have, follow-up thoughts about that, and some people have already contacted me. So I sort of reorganized when I did my homework, reorganized the subtopics that are in our existing 20-year-old document into the 6. And then Melanie did it sort of analog-wise. She told me with renumbering and deciding which parts of the existing guidelines fit under which of the 6 principles. So tell us about your thinking on that, Melanie.
And a copy of what Melanie prepared and handed out to the committee is actually down here
Oh, yeah, sorry.
on the table.
You told me to say that,
Yep.
and I forgot.
Team effort.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. I'm not sure how easy this is going to be because...
It's not going to be easy.
Because it does take quite a bit of time to go through all of this and think about it. But I gave it my best shot, and so I'm open to, obviously, listening to anybody else who has some good ideas on this, and I'm sure we'll have them. Number 1 is to restore and enhance the forest in all improved projects, public, private, public, and otherwise. And what I did for the first 7, it seemed to me, at least 1.1 through 1.7, that these all really applied to the first principle, which is to restore and enhance. And then 2.1 through 2.3, I thought fit best under number 5, which is fit every built structure within its neighborhood context.
Okay, let's, I'm sorry, let me slow you down just a little bit.
Okay?
I know that this is, we don't have a full, we have a quorum, but we don't have a full committee here. But I do want to get, first of all, Brandon, I don't see it, so now because there's so much stuff here. The one that I did, is
Yeah,
that
I've
printed
got-
out?
I've got yours.
It's over here.
Okay, I'm the
Oh,
only one
okay.
that doesn't have
Yep.
mine.
Okay,
let me-
here.
Okay, thanks, my fault.
I've got yours.
Because
Victoria.
and now I see that the author of the public, the citizen effort has joined the call, Carolyn Walker Davis. Thank you. Very kind, thank you. So one way to do this, I think, is since there's 3 folks with probably slight differences in the way that they did this exercise. Carolyn, I don't know if you can hear me, but I had asked before you got on the line here if anyone from the public had any comments on this item. And obviously you do have comments on this item because you did all your homework that was not even assigned to you. So that's extra bonus points. And I wanted to, now that you're here, open it up to anything you would like to say. Sorry, Melanie, is that okay?
No, that's okay. Sure.
About what you submitted. Carolyn, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yes, I'm here. I'm just walking into a different room so everybody doesn't hear me.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage because I have none of the written materials with me
Right.
because I'm away from my office. So from memory, what I tried to do several weeks ago before the last meeting was go through and do your homework. And I found that, and you covered all of this at the last meeting, basically. I found just so much redundancy that I just started simplifying, and recategorized it into what an architect would like to know coming to any jurisdiction, starting with the site, going to the building, and so on. Again, I don't have this in front of me, but that was my input, and I did talk to Doug about it. You guys did cover it, so I feel like I'm tapping in inappropriately a little bit, but my main message and plea would be to make it simple, and I think that's exactly where you're headed. I mean, I see there's layers of these attempts over the years, even before 20 years ago. And so the goal, I think, of this committee is to keep it simple. One document would be lovely from a working architect's point of view, saying all the points you need, but the more layers, the harder it is for us coming in and really getting a solid, simple message. And that's really all I need to say today, because that's exactly, I think, what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. And just so the public knows, I'm seeing this really in comparison for the first time too, but what Carolyn has done is 5 categories of information, which are different, sometimes overlapping and sometimes the same as the 6 principles. So her site category is basically the forest category it's actually a combination of 3 of our principles is her site. And then there's a separate one for parking, there's a separate one for walls and fences and lighting. So, but it does appear to be, and Carolyn, I wanted to ask you one question. It doesn't look like you've eliminated, Carolyn, any of the principles or the subtopics. You've just kind of condensed them, or did you? Because you're saying that it's redundant.
I did. I condensed it because I just feel like you're saying the same thing several times, and it could be said in one nice titled bullet, and then below it are all the little minute ones from 20 years ago and before, or whatever we come up with. But yeah, just even 6 to me seemed too many. But again, I don't want to take away from everything you've done. And I will pipe in again here and there on some of the, I do think simple should come out. But anyway, that's another point, so.
Okay.
Hey,
Yeah,
hey, Carolyn, this is Brandon Swanson. Hi there.
Hi, Brandon, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good. Hey, just a quick question for you. So when you say the redundancy, I just want to make sure we're all clear. What you were talking about was those 6 guiding principles. You think maybe the 6 were redundant in themselves. Is that kind of what you were saying?
I am saying that without trying to hurt anybody's
No,
feelings.
no. Nobody's going to get their feelings hurt. That's
Okay.
what I just want to make sure we all
Yeah.
knew what you meant when you said redundant, what level you were talking about.
Yeah, I didn't mean that. And again, I don't have that piece of paper I worked on several weeks ago in front of me, but you do, I think. And that was my thought at the time prior to last week's meeting when a lot of people said the same thing.
So Carolyn, now I have to say, I'm glad you asked that, Brandon, because now I'm a little confused. It looks to me like you've preserved and added to the 6 that we had. I thought you were talking about redundancy of throughout the 20-year-old document. You're saying that when you look through the 20-year-old document, that was not redundant, but that the 6 organizing principles are redundant?
I thought that they further complicated what we're trying to do. So, and there may be some redundancy within the 20-year-old principles and then the other layers that we had to kind of read, which I admit I did not read all those documents from 2 weeks ago, but I skimmed them, I looked at them, and it's just too overwhelming. So it's I think that's why I tried to do the homework, and I thought, oh, this is just more confusing than it was before to me as a working architect. So,
And you're including in that trying to, you just said, let me just make sure I understand, trying to look throughout all the documents, other regulatory documents, for example, that we're not working on, and just couldn't get through it, is what you're saying, because the information is in different places.
yeah, sort of what you all said last week.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you very much, Carolyn. We'll come back to everybody on this topic at the end of this topic also, I think is a good idea. Okay, Melanie.
Okay, thanks.
Yes,
Thanks and for all,
thank
thanks
you.
for all your work. Okay, bye.
I think what we were saying, many of us last week, was our concern is the redundancy in the old document, not the redundancy, any redundancy, particularly in our 6 principles. But I was particularly concerned about the redundancies and thinking that we really need to simplify what was presented 20-some years ago, because that's what people at least have relayed to us, find so frustrating about this. So I appreciate what Carolyn has given us and all the work that she went to provide it. Now, just to understand how you want to proceed,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, when I'm talking about issues 1.1 to 1.7, that may not be intelligible to anyone who's not sitting up at this desk, because they probably don't have all the tools that we do to look at this. So would you want me to read some of the
You know
items?
what?
How
I'm
would
glad
you
you're
like to
saying, no, it's a very good idea. In fact, I'm going to take a little 1-minute pause and see, Brandon, is it possible, do we have a projector that we could put there's like 70 some, and I know it may not be great to read up here, but there's a list of just the subtopics in order that if we could lay it down on the projector, maybe it would work. Or, I don't know if there's a way to project something from my computer that I could send to you, for example. This is a workshop after all.
So what are you hoping to put up? Melanie's version of
No,
this?
no,
The
no
6
one's
guiding
version, no one's
principles?
version, just the, in order, all the subtopics that we're trying to wrestle with. Does that, yeah, so
The
it's,
2001,
yes, 2001 in order, that page, basically it's 2 pages.
Yes, give me 1 second.
And if they were next to one another, side by side, they might fit on the projector. And it would be useful, I think, to the public to see that, if it's possible. So give us a little
About side by side.
moment.
I can definitely get
One.
digitally up on the screen share the original
Okay.
set.
Why don't we do that, and then we can, if we can't get them both at the same time, we'll just work our way through it and maybe click back and forth between, I think it's on 2 pages, the full list. So this is a list of the 2001, so from 20 years ago, the residential guidelines subheadings in their original order. So when we're trying to find information in the last 20 years, how do we do it? How do we go through? Where do we, if you were to read it cover to cover, this is what you would see in that order. So Brandon is kind enough to, on the fly, do a little, but I do think we can, so that prevents, it relieves you, Melanie, from having to read the entire guideline to us, which is good. But what you're saying, and what I will say I said, and what Carolyn said, and what Doug agrees with, while we still don't have Don, is that the first group, 1.1 through 1.7, is so obviously part of preserving the forest.
Absolutely.
And it is clearly, like, if you did 1.1 through 1.7, you would be going, a long way toward principle number 1, which is to restore and enhance the forest in all improvement projects, private, public, and otherwise. So I don't think there's any disagreement among the 3 of us on that. I don't know. I don't mind if the public wants to chime. Oh, Don, you're here. That's okay. Don, I have taken up a huge amount of space. Is it okay to sit over there a little bit farther? Sorry, I've got so many papers. Thank you. Welcome, Don. Records show Don has joined the meeting. We have more of a quorum. So, is everyone following along out there on this? Okay, and I'm seeing nods. Totally happy to interrupt this process, but so far I don't see any disagreement on anyone. Don, all I've just said is that I have 3 homeworks in front of me, one from a member of the public, one from Melanie, one from basically Doug and me. I don't know if you have one that you brought in or that you sent to Brandon.
I'm sorry, no.
Okay. So, and so far, from what I see, there is 100% agreement that everything that is currently in item or chapter 1, which is is all about the forest, and so it naturally fits under restore and enhance the forest in all improvement projects, which is principle number 1. Then, Melanie, you lead the way. Do you have others that fall into that first principle?
Yeah, I put down 4.1. I said a significant portion of each site should remain as landscaped open space. So I think that fits best in number 1 and number 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't think I really have anything else on 1.
In the forest.
And I'm drowning in paper like you.
All right, Madam Chair. you go.
Yeah.
You got something?
Number 10.1 and 10.2 and 10.4 provide for upper and lower canopy trees when designing the landscape. And then 10.2 is to landscape plans that use native plants and other varieties accustomed to growing along the central coast are encouraged. That could be, 1 or 2. And then plants in the public right-of-way should be predominantly green foliage plants in keeping with design traditions of Carmel. Trees ought to be added to that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the public right-of-way without any trees,
Mm-hmm.
it would not be Carmel.
Right.
So those were my thoughts on number 1 items. Then going down to...
Now, wait, let me just
okay.
pause there and just see if there's any reactions from the rest of the group. And also, my printout here does not have all my pages, so I'm just frantically looking for...
What do you need?
My
Here,
homework that I
No,
did.
I've got
You got
yours.
my homework?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, but you have all pages of it?
Well,
Can I see?
didn't you just have two?
Is
I
it
thought?
two-sided?
Huh? I have just this and this,
Sorry.
and it looks like
Can I
that,
just have it
and
now?
that's,
Can I look at yours for a second?
yours has everything on it, I think.
Okay, you have a better copy than I have. Can I hold this between us so we can share?
Yeah, go ahead and keep this in front of you so you
Okay.
can see better.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, now what do we want to
So
do?
now, so what you have said, just to synopsize, is that everything from Chapter 1 of the 20-year-old document plus 4.1 plus a number of things from the Chapter 10, and you have called out 10.1, 2, and 4. And those are a number of things that have to do, like 10.1 is provide for upper and lower canopy trees when designing the landscape, for example. So I think I'm going to just throw this out for nods to the folks who are here. Do people agree in general, and does this committee agree, that there are a number of things under Chapter 10, like provide for upper and lower canopy trees when designing the landscape, that are great supporting principles for restore and enhance the forest? Is there any controversy about anything we're talking about so far? I'm just trying to read the room and I don't see who's on Zoom right now. But so far, so good. And I'm just trying to see if there's any differences between what you and I did, Melanie, and what Doug weighed in on.
Probably.
There might be minor
differences.
differences. I think it looks like 1, 2, 4 is what you did. I did 1, 2, 4, 3, and 7. So let's see what those are. 10.3 is planting in areas visible from the street or other public places should continue the forest character. Does that seem related to Principle 1? Does it? I like the audible. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
do this
helpful.
like Southern church style. That's good. And then 10.7, I put use paving materials that will minimize impacts on the root systems. What do people think about that? Is that a forest enhancer? Or some other, is better in some other category?
It could be easily number 2 also,
Number 2, subordinate every
natural-
built structure to the character of the forest?
yeah.
Because it's
Some of these are
paving?
like two, I think. go
Could be
along with
either
two-
one.
Yeah, go along with,
What do you think, Doug, about, oh, well, you had looked at mine, but you hadn't looked at Melanie's. Where do you think? Do you think it belongs with the forest? To enhance the forest? Yeah, I mean, I guess I have to agree, if you're in agreement, Melanie and Don, that paving materials that minimize impacts on the root system is more related to enhancing the forest than subordinating built structures to the character of the forest, I
and also
think.
preserving.
And preserving,
I
yeah.
wanted to change some of the wording that we had, but I'm
Yeah?
not sure that this is a good time for it.
Well, wait,
But,
let's see
you
if we
know,
have
at
time
some
at the
point-
end. You know,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
maybe we have time today. We'll
Okay.
see, because it's related. All right, so does anyone have any comments, even from the public, about preserving the forest? And whether there's something that was noted somewhere, or even something that seems neglected by, or redundant in any of this, that really needs to be addressed under restoring and enhancing the forest? No? Looks pretty good? I think we should.
Yeah, I think so.
And also, I think there are only 6, so if we do one, if we do each of the 6, one at a time, I think
Yeah, I
that's a
think
pretty
that's the fastest.
organized way to do it. Okay. All right. I see like no major controversies anyway. And I don't hear anything from the Zoom room, but just so you know, I can't see who's in the Zoom room while this is up. So, I don't know, Brandon, can you see both? You could alert me if somebody's trying to raise their hand or something in the Zoom room?
Cannot. There you go. Thanks, Sebastian.
Okay, go back and forth. Okay. So far, anyone from the Zoom room have any thoughts about Category 1, which is enhancing and preserving the forest, and what types of things, whether we've adequately...
And maybe just invite in the Zoom room, because we are going to be toggling back and forth between screens. So if you're out there in the Zoom area and you want to chime in, this is a little more free flowing. So just unmute yourself. Don't feel like you have to raise your hand.
Yes.
Nobody needs to be shy.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, like I said, it's going to be like a church shout out because, oh, somebody's unmuting. Is that?
Yeah, it's Janice Brodner. I don't have the advantage of seeing the tenants that you had up. And so that's kind of unfortunate for us. And so, but one of the things that I would say is, do we have something about the replacement of trees when we've had to remove trees when something has been designed? Thank you.
That's a great question, and I want to direct anyone who's at home and has a computer nearby that's separate from what they're listening in on, or that they can have a screen. If you go to steeringcommittee.universe, and there's a dot between the univer and the SE, these 6 principles are on there, so you can follow along at home. If you scroll down to the bottom of that page, they're just contingent, provisional, but they're there just so everyone can follow along. I hope that helps. But the question was, is there any, and you will know the answer to this, Brandon, because it's probably not here, but I think it's in other city documents, that when you have a problem on your site and you accidentally, or maybe on purpose, harm a tree, there are various things that kick in. Maybe tell us at least where that is.
Where the regulations on what happens to you when you break a rule in the city?
Or just, she's saying, something has happened to a tree, maybe through your ownership of the property or through your development of the property, and that's not addressed in the guidelines, like anything that you have, it says stay away from the roots and things like that, but it doesn't say, and if anything happens.
Yeah, that's more of a municipal code thing. So that's, if it's a building code violation, that's going to be in the building code, zoning code violations in the zoning code. It depends on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And actually what I'm not really saying if you accidentally damage a tree. I'm saying you've designed a house and there's a tree that you've been given permission to remove. Is there anything in these tenants, because I haven't been able to find that link, is there anything in these tenants that say you have to replace that tree if you've removed something for the construction of a house?
And the answer is going to be not in the historical document of these guidelines. It's never been located there, but it is located elsewhere in the city regulations. Now, Janice, you might be saying, gosh, I want to locate it here too. And I think that's something we can note and see if that makes sense to the staff and Nori and the whole rest of the town. Or we can say, perhaps this needs to have a link through this, because we're talking about hyperlinking this document out the wazoo.
That's much more of a regulatory type of thing than a design guideline for a guidance on how to design a project. That's something you much more often will find in zoning code that's codified in law. So one thing to think about the difference between a design guideline and a municipal code is that a design guideline, while definitely regulatory document for a city, it is not quote unquote the law per se. Zoning code and municipal code is codified because it is the law. So it's a little bit more strict when it comes to things like thou shalt replace these many trees. So that's where you're going to find things like that, Janice, is in the zoning code.
And Melanie has her hand up.
If we look at principle number 1, it says restore and enhance, but if we say restore, preserve, and enhance and protect, the restoration can get to that point. A simple statement can be made in here referring to the spot in the code where someone can find tree replacement. Because we say in the first principle, restore, and that's the first word. So that gets to what she's saying.
Yeah.
As long as we do a segue into the different codes.
Mm-hmm. And that's something we've talked about in this group, and that's going to be in that first draft that you'll see. Is there are links to along the side, through the whole document. There's related documents and links to those documents and related zoning code sections to help bridge that gap, so you know where to go. What's the implementation arm of the design guideline that we're talking about?
I think it's a very good point. I think it's going to be a great example to see whether, how that hyperlink stuff works. We're going to check now that Janice has, brought this to the front burner. We're going to check and see that if it's not there, that it gets there, that that's enough, that satisfies the public's desire for that. I think it's certainly related to restoring the forest. So, okay, Don, any comments from you on the forest?
The whole issue of follow-through and historical follow-through, that is the wrong time.
Do you have a microphone? Sorry.
That one doesn't move for some reason.
I agree with Brandon that the enforcement stuff should be in the building code rather than adding.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a very important issue of I think there's been a lack of I don't know how to express it, but monitoring to make sure things remain intact. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'd have to agree with Don. That's one of my major criticisms right now is what's happening to the forest in the right-of-way as well as on public property. And it needs to be, the public needs to understand that they have to help us with enforcement, that when they see something that isn't right, they need to call the staff. We've got 2 really great people now who do enforcement for us, and they're there to help us. They can't be out in the field just roaming around. They are out there specifically when they get, comments, concerns, criticisms of what's happening in their neighborhood. So kind of being neighborhood watchdogs on these issues, especially if you care about the forest, it's just tremendously important to give that information to the city, and then we'll see some changes. But if people just ignore it.
And let me just build on that for a second, because I think that Brandon's pledge to, after this process in a way, as a CODA, to work on a work plan, I can't remember what you call it.
It's like a next steps document
Next step
that we're producing along with
which
this,
has to do with how these other pieces fit together, whether it's enforcement, whether it's procedures, whether it's probably maybe complaint acceptance and processing, those sorts of things. And so we're talking about something that goes wrong after the building has been gone through the design process.
Well, and I think since we're sort of bird walking this a little bit, one of the things that I think was that fell down on the design guidelines from 25 years ago is it got written and then it wasn't a living document.
Right.
Ordinances and regulations are by nature, even though they're written, they're not in stone. They're meant to be somewhat living. So every few years doing a brush up of this, I think it's, we're going to do a really good job and get this across the finish line, but I think there's going to be things after we implement it a few months later, like, oh, I wish we had done this a little bit differently. We need to be okay reopening this document every year or two and making little polishes rather than waiting another 25 years. I think that's, in my mind, that's a big part of that next step / work plan is realizing that we can't just put it on the shelf for 25 years. It's still going to be good 25 years later, but maybe if we had spent some time with it,
Yeah.
they're meant to be living documents.
Yeah, and just the response document. Okay, so let's, I'm not seeing a whole lot of other concerns about number 1. So let's move on to number 2, which again is to subordinate every built structure to the character of the forest, natural environment, and to the natural features of its own site. So this is about the relationship of the things that human beings make to the things that are in creation already. So, and that we, in Carmel anyway, want to subordinate those things all the time, all of them. So, Melanie, I'm going to let you lead the way again. So this is, let's look at what you wanted to be under category 2.
Let's see,
2.
okay, category 2. I put 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, and 5. And then 5.2, 5.3, and then all of 6, 6.1 to 6.7. And then also there are some issues with 7.1 to, let's see, well, the 7.1 through whatever that could be either under 5 or also 2. So that's how I looked at them. And then under principle number 2 on the second page, 10.3, 10.5, 10.67, and then under 11, 11.1, 11.4 through 11.8, which is the end.
Okay, so you have 11.4, 5, and 6 also. So what I'm doing is, it's not easy, but I'm trying to see where there might be different impulses to organize these things differently, and
Sure.
just so we can hash it out and see
Yeah.
what we think is the consensus. So now again, we're on subordinating things to the forest, all things that humans make. And the differences I see, well, first of all, let's look at the commonalities. Our public member who did the homework, yes, put this all under the same, so she combined principle 1, 2, and 3 into one principle called sight. Yes, oh wait, Doug, were you raising your hand?
Finish up, no.
Okay, and then seems to have categorized things similarly to what Melanie just said. The difference between what Melanie did and what Doug and I were doing was 5.2 and 5.3 are, what does that say? Sorry, trying to find it. 5.2. Maintain view opportunities to natural features that lie outside the property. And 5.3, maintain views through a property to natural features when feasible. So let's start there. And I and Doug put those under fit every built structure within its neighborhood context.
That's equally as good.
You think it's as good?
Yeah.
Any other
Yeah. I'm not
thoughts?
wedded to these.
You're not wedded. No, nobody's
No,
wedded. That's what
yeah,
I'm saying.
yeah,
Nobody's wedded.
Exactly, because that's the whole point.
Don't
is
be
to
too
see how
easygoing. Yes, don't be too easygoing. So if you think that there's some reason it should be in a certain place, assert that, because we are all
No, I
easy.
get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ken,
No.
would like to approach. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah. There's a word that I don't see in here that should be used, it's the word percolation.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
And if you take a house that has a double-car garage, you've got a double-width driveway, that's a massive amount of space. Water will not percolate down to take care of the trees and shrubs and that kind. Cement pathways on either side of the house, that cuts down on percolation.
Mm-hmm.
And patios in the back, which everybody wants, that cuts down on percolation.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere there needs to be some consideration that if you're going to have a forested city, you're going to have water that has to go down the roots.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in there, if the forester was here, I think they'd be saying, hey, please help us with that percolation problem. It's a major problem. So it should be talked about somewhere. Thank you.
Well, we do have we were back one at principle 1 in preserving the forest, 10.7 from the old document is use paving materials that will minimize impacts on tree root systems. That's an aspect of what you're saying.
Right.
But actually, what you're saying, and maybe it's in, this is again just subheadings. Maybe if I had it photographically in my head, it's.
The driveway, center
Yes.
down the driveway,
Yes.
be earth planting some type
Yeah.
of
Well, and remember too that, Ken, these are the headings.
Right.
And so in both the old and the updated guidelines, there's multiple bullets under here that say how to achieve these things.
Yeah.
And that's where you'll find those things. Because I know, I don't have it memorized either, but I do know
Right.
there are specific, in the current and then the draft of, having those grass paved areas, using permeable surfaces to protect the tree roots. So it is in there.
So,
Yeah.
so you are protecting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a very high level, if that's the way to put it, document in the sense that we are not delving into any of the wording that's inside the bulk of, this is 2 pages as opposed to however many pages there
100
really,
and some
100
odd,
some
yeah.
pages.
Yeah.
So this is really like headings. And yes, I'm noting percolation as part of that, but it may end up rising into a heading. But for now, it's probably in the document elsewhere. Carol, are you coming to the mic? Okay.
Hi.
I'm thinking about lot coverage, and, you know, we have all our rules, 45% and all that, and ADUs now are going to be coming in, and an 800-foot ADU is, you know, are we rearranging the deck furniture on the Titanic is the question. So we, you know, if we cannot control ADUs, we cannot control lot coverage, you know, to any serious degree.
It's another consideration.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead, Melanie. Oh, wait, Doug had his hand up first. Can I let him? Yeah,
No,
yeah?
this is just a quickie.
Okay.
In response to what, excuse me, Ken's saying, I think one thing we could do in our landscaping and in our principles, excuse me, is give more emphasis to the use of gravel. I have to stop.
We can come back to you, Melanie. And do you have, is this water for you here? Yeah, okay. Let's let Doug go ahead and let her recover.
Do we have a contradiction here? If the forest is preeminent over the built structure, and we're concerned about the roots of trees in 1.3, is 5.2 and 5.3 contrarian?
All right, I'm looking for the actual read.
Maintain view opportunities. Maintain views through a property. That signals to me you can do trimming for view.
Well, I think if I could offer up where I believe that comes down is actually when you're constructing structures. So this gets to, in our zoning code, there's also the sections about privacy and views, that when you build something, you can't take away a significant portion of someone's existing view. So I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that's not about trimming trees to get views. That's about not putting structures in existing views.
And by the way, I think you're asking that question helps us, and Brandon's answer help us put it outside of number 2. So I was taking notes as Melanie was saying what went where, that she put 5.2 and 5.3 under principle 2, but maybe that's confusing to put it there. And so the other place to put it would be, or one other place, but it would be under fit every built structure within its neighborhood context. So you're talking about being respectful of built structure to another built structure. And so I think that's a good, this is exactly the way we resolve these things, is just figuring out, like, you know, to whatever degree any of us can, you know, I don't know, preemptively test or think about how this could be understood or misunderstood is very, very helpful.
Madam Chair, I think you have
Yes.
a hand up.
Do
So
we
I
have
see
a hand up?
Sebastian flipped over to the Zoom screen. Janice Bradner.
Oh, Janice. Okay, go ahead,
Yeah.
Janice.
Yeah, when I hear subordinate to the neighborhood structure, I guess I get a little bit concerned. I think it needs to be both the neighborhood structure and the village. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Janice, I would love your input on if we could just get you those principles, because there's no principle yet that says subordinate built structures to other built structures. That you may be thinking of fit every built structure within its neighborhood context, but that we haven't gotten to that yet. But we are saying we were subordinating built structures to the natural environment is the essence of number 2.
Yeah, but I also heard the term neighborhood, and that was where my concern was. Thank you.
Right, that's the next principle. So again, I don't know, is there a way to get Janice that link so she can look at this? I don't know. Janice, do you mind, Brandon, is it too distracting if I have Janice ping you and you send her the link? Is that a way to do it?
I'll see what I can do.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I know it's a lot.
Brandon, maybe you could put it in the chat.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, let me see what I can do. I'm not the one doing the Zoom, but I'm going to see if I can split screen here a little bit. Just everybody give me a couple minutes here. You guys keep going.
Okay, we're going to keep going while we do the tech support. David, do you want to come to the mic? I know, it's a pain. But then we can hear you.
That's fine. I'm looking on the sharing site, the steering committee site,
Yeah.
and I'm not finding it. Can you explain to me
Just
where?
scroll down. It's just one big page. You just keep scrolling.
But isn't there a link for the document that you provided to everybody?
Maybe that's not there. That's in the, sorry, I thought you were looking for the principles. The principles that this committee has been discussing, these 6, are down on the very bottom of that.
I'm sorry, where's this coming from?
That was in the agenda packet that Brandon set out for when we started the meeting a week ago.
Okay.
That's on somewhere in the city.
Okay.
I wouldn't know how that's stored, but it's basically part of the agenda for this meeting. So you should be able to still see it there, David. Okay, so that's 5.2 and 5.3. That was expeditious. Then we have 10.3 through 10.7. And those are, 10.3 is planting in areas visible from this. Oh, no, wait, sorry, we already took care of this. We agreed that we would put it up in the landscaping one. So I take that back. So now we're down to the 11s, which has a lot to do with fences and walls. So I would like to actually just ask the group, I know where I believe that it makes, that's a built structure. Do people feel similarly that this is, the 11s that deal with garden fences and walls are part of human structures and buildings and should be subordinate to the forest? Is that a good place for that sort of stuff?
Are you proposing to move it to 3?
3.
Or
Keep every built structure modest, simple. I mean, I don't know.
or
That-
5?
Or 5. Fit every built
Neighborhood
structure within its
character.
neighborhood context? I don't know. I think it's a question for everybody, so, and maybe even from the public. So we have a whole chapter on fences and gates and walls and things like that that aren't really a concept in their own. They're obviously part of built structures. They're part of the forest character. They're part. So the question is, in other words, we don't have a principle that's at that high level about gates. We have principles about the forest and about buildings and about neighbors. So any thoughts, Don, maybe from you about the 11, the stuff that has to do with fences and walls? Is it more important, or does it have a natural home in subordinating to the forest? Does it have a natural home in neighborhood context?
I think neighborhood context, I think all those. What could be more important than fences and so forth, fitting into the neighborhood context? I think.
I would agree with that too.
Okay. So
But
what,
I can see it also in subordinate built structures, blah, blah, blah. And then to the natural features of its own site. In other words, don't try to invent something that doesn't really work. And, what I'm
Yeah.
saying is that there's a statement in there that says subordinate all built structures to the natural features of its own site. And so I think that, it can go in 2 places.
I actually think this is a possibly very important concept here, because we've
Yep.
spent a lot of time talking about the out-of-control, weird estate gates that are coming in everywhere, and electric, you're going 5 feet from the door, from the street to the front door, but you've got an elaborate, estate gate and columns, and members of our committee who are not present are particularly irritated by that. So actually, you could argue, and I'll just do this for devil's advocacy purposes, that if we put it under the neighborhood context, and that is already established along a street, that somebody has gone that direction in a kind of overblown way, that if we say, okay, the next fence that goes up needs to fit that context,
Yeah.
then we're actually possibly putting that ahead of the health of the forest or the subordination to the forest. How do people feel about that? I'm throwing that out there because you're stimulating my thinking here. Any thoughts from the public? Yes, Carol? You guys should be in the front row.
Yeah.
What are you doing back there, way back in the second row?
We were trying to be subtle. This is Carol. I kind of like what Carolyn did, where she put them as a separate fences, gates, walls, fences, lighting, maybe walls, fences, gates. I'm thinking if I'm looking for things and I'm wondering how I'm going to do my gates and my fences and my walls, whatever, that it's simpler if it's separate. Like we're trying to collapse things maybe too much, whereas if we have kind of a glossary that's very clear, maybe we have 6 or 7 items, but they're easily found and easily looked up. It's just a thought.
Let me ask you, Carol, though, about, since you're here at the mic, I'll put you on the spot. Would you be more worried that someone would continue the tradition of a neighborhood possibly in the wrong direction or the right direction, or would you be more concerned that the forest be respected and that the things be modest that are kind of in that interface between the public right-of-way and the private property?
Yes.
Which one's more concerning to you?
That's a hard decision. I don't know how
Can I try to help you, actually? Because I think I might have a suggestion there. I'm hearing this is a great conversation, and please stay here, Carol. I think one thing to think about is, Madam Chair, you were asking, which one of these guiding principles makes the most sense for the fences, and I think that maybe they both make sense.
Maybe
and
they do.
So one of the things we had talked about at the last meeting, if you recall, from a structural perspective, is the old guidelines and like the outline that you guys saw showed the heading still, so like you still have a fences in section, but we talked about having a little box at the start of every one of those named sections that says, here are the guiding principles that relate to this section. So this is a great example of where 2 guiding principles actually control one section, and we can create hyperlinks within the document to those guiding principles. So if you want a reminder of what they are, you click on it, it takes you back to the start of the document so you can go read them again. So that might be when we're running into these ones where we've got multiple guiding principles that govern, rather than trying to pick one that's the best.
I mean, I agree that can happen, and it may be happening right now as we speak, but I really do want to know from my colleagues and whoever wants to weigh in on the public whether we think that which is more important for something on your property line that faces the street, that it coordinate with your neighbors or that it follow the principles of subordination to the forest? Is anyone, I mean, honestly, because I don't know what I think I know what I think would help Carmel look best, or feel more the way we think Carmel should look.
Are those contradictory? Can they not be together?
They could be contradictory. So like in other words, which one has predominance? Because let's say, as I said, and I can visualizing certain streets, 5 neighbors on a street have somehow grandfathered or slipped through a process or violated a code and it can't be repaired. And the structures that they've put on their property line are not modest and do not subordinate themselves to the forest. And then the last property or the handful of properties that are in between those say, well, they got to do it. I would like to match this estate quality that we've been railing against. That would be, if this principle is under number 5, fit every structure within its neighborhood context, then that person would have every right to, in fact, would be expected to create another overblown estate gate in order to fit the context.
But that goes back to Janice's point of neighborhood and village. We have a village character. And I agree with you, the subordination would be more important to the forest than matching your neighbor. And especially if the neighbor doesn't look like the village.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the thought, thank you. And then the follow-up question is, does that do enough that, let me just channel Marianne for a second. I think if she were sitting here, in fact, she said this publicly many times, when the landscape ordinance is finished, I think her hope, and I hope I'm getting this right, is that you just have to build a fence out of wood that's very, that's very prescriptive. That they have to be simple, they have to be natural, they can't have, stone lighted columns with lions on top and electric gates. That is her vision. I don't know if the rest of the folks here agree with that vision, but certainly
Victoria?
somebody's talk?
It's Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just gonna say, is there a way we could say Old Carmel, and then define it with some illustrations?
There's definitely illustration. I think we're gonna have more illustrations in this coming up draft than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, I think to speak to Carolyn's question, we're gonna have a lot of illustrations, not necessarily pegging a time period or an architectural style per se, but just what is good design, whether, the subordination to the forest, natural materials, human scale, authentic construction, it's nestled, all these things that guide someone to do something in the correct way. I don't think it's necessarily about a time frame or anything like that. It's just good design now.
Yeah.
Good, okay, great, thanks.
And it also follows tradition.
Yes. So let's take the temperature, at least, I want to do a little poll of the three of you all at least, and Brandon, the four, of what we think about prescribing more strictly that interface of if anyone wants to put a fence, prescribing those materials, that approach. How do you feel about it, Don?
When I hear that everything has to be wooden fences, I don't quite agree with that.
You don't quite agree with that?
No, I do not.
Okay.
And by the way, I think, to me, it's not a matter of where these individual points go, because the idea is all of these things in bold type here, these headings, are expected to be adhered to, and therefore that answers the question of whether or not you can do something bad just because your neighbor does it, because restoring and enhance the forest and all its improvement projects and everything else, keeping things structured, modest, and simple. That doesn't rule those out. They're all there.
Right, nothing's
so I
ruled
don't
out.
see why we're concerned about which section it goes into.
Yeah.
That's me.
Well, it's just a question of what is, the most important principle. What do we want to make sure that, if there is a governing principle, then we make sure it's pointing in the right direction. I mean, I don't know. It's just an exercise. We'll see what it yields. Doug seems to have a comment.
And Madam Chair, Doug,
Sorry.
they should be up on the screen now for people.
Oh, good. Oh, thank you.
These are the 6 guiding principles that we've been talking about, so hopefully Janice and the crew on Zoom can see that.
Thank you.
No, cannot.
Cannot, okay.
Oh, well, we're trying everything.
Yes.
So some people on Zoom can see it, some people on Zoom can't. So it might be how you're doing your view on your actual Zoom screen then.
No, it's up now.
Okay.
Doug, were you about to say something?
The existing guidelines have a dominant theme of openness rather than fences, gates, or walls.
Yes.
And then it says, where a sense of enclosure or privacy is desired, shrubs and hedges
Yes.
shall be used. So I think the openness is a neighborhood context.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually one of the the original set of guidelines. It says start from no fence. Start to try to design with no fence.
Now, I don't want to lose an item this committee's talked about before, which is in the existing document on gates. It only talks about garden gates to get inside your wall or inside your yard. We've talked about driveway gates, which blocks off that sense of openness, particularly if you have a piece of property that already has an existing wall, or there's a wall proposed as part of the development. There's the existing code or existing guidelines are silent on driveway gates.
That's a good point. And then just to follow up on what Don was saying, Don does not want to restrict us to wood. Doug is pointing out that we're really supposed to have nothing. We're supposed to default to nothing or plants. And then if you go, it's almost like it's a scale, it's a progression. The other opposite end of that is a rock wall with little decorative iron on the top, which I've remember from the planning commission, probably you and I on the planning commission going, what is that? And then that gets built. where's
I
your,
explain where I'm coming from. I don't
tell
think I
us
wanna-
where you're coming from.
I don't want to rule out low walls. A lot of this has to do with views and so forth, but as a landscape defining feature, some low walls can be very appropriate.
Do you, if your low walls, do your low walls have certain restricted materials? Or do you care what they're made of, your low walls?
That's a tough question. Sure.
Natural material.
It's not going to be natural stone, but on the other hand,
As opposed to stucco-faced wall, is there any preference between the type of materials?
there may be a preference, but I think we can get too restrictive.
Okay.
Okay, I think you and Mary Ann are like opposite. It's good. It's like a sort of, devil's advocacy team. She would.
Oh, that's good for discussion.
It's good for discussion.
just make one
Yes, go
point?
ahead, Melanie.
Everybody's talked about things with fences and walls.
Melanie,
but
can you speak into your microphone, please?
talked about fences and walls and everything except height. And that is one of the biggest problems in town currently, I think, is that we prefer 4-foot walls. And when people are redoing their houses or replacing, they're not replacing them with 4-foot, they're replacing them with 6-foot. And they're usually solid staked. So there's no openness. And there's no view into the,
That's the
yeah, and
follow-through.
there's no view into the property. It's just like a wall. We're walling ourselves off. We're becoming like suburbia in an urban area, outside of an urban area. That's not what we're about.
Yeah,
So,
as an aside, I'd love if you guys have examples of these, because I've heard these comments, and I know that there's definitely more follow-up we can do, but if you have specific examples, I doubt in the last few years we've approved a solid 6-foot
yes.
fence on the front. I'm not saying it didn't get put in.
Not right now.
I'm just saying it didn't get.
I'm not gonna say it now. I'm just
Yeah, no,
saying
not right
that
now,
it's
please, but
early.
talk to me afterwards, because
Sure.
we'll go check it out and see if maybe they built something that they didn't get permitted
Yeah,
for.
well, I brought it up to staff.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that when we're talking, and because there's so many remodels, every time someone sells a house, it seems like the new people have to, throw the old house away and start over again. But what the code should say and what we should enforce is our current regulations, not let someone go back to the past, but if we feel strongly that we want openness, then we have to do it and stand by it. And so I'm very, very concerned about the height of anything.
Well, so, what you're making a case for right now, I think, Melanie, and again, we'll see how it all plays out, but if it was clear that everything that is on the property line facing the street is subordinate to the forest and must add to the forest, then I actually don't think we'd be having these problems, because the planning commission could look at a thing and say, I don't see how that maintains forest character.
Right,
I don't see that's
absolutely.
actually competing with the forest
Yeah.
character. But obviously, there's all sorts of requirements for all those structures that need to be enforced. So
I think
let's,
you're touching on an issue that a lot of it has to do with where is the wall? Sure, the ones along the property line absolutely can be very restrictive. But I don't know of other
oh, so you're coming around now.
cases like my own where I have plaster walls, but they're way back away.
Yeah,
from-
you don't have a wall in your front yard.
I certainly do.
No, well, you have your house wall. You don't have, you have a wall in the front property line of your house?
Absolutely not.
Right,
But the
exactly.
intermediate point, there is a wall,
Okay.
yes.
Yes,
It's a
okay.
stucco wall.
Right,
And
so,
it's very
so
appropriate.
now I'm seeing, I think there's a confluence. You and Marianne actually agree about the front property line.
Absolutely.
Okay. It's good to clarify these things. Good, good.
But I thought we were applying it to the whole lot.
Sorry, okay, now it's
Oh,
good. It's
no,
good to
no,
talk
no,
it through.
no.
Okay, so let's go to number 3, which is keep every built structure modest and simple. I have a feeling I'm going to hear from the audience on that one. But let's just have Melanie introduce what she put into number 3. Do you need your?
Can you kind of take over, because I can't see right now. I can't
Oh,
read.
gosh, okay,
I'm
sure.
sorry.
No worries. I'll pick through it. It's you'll know better than I, and you can correct me.
No, I'm not sure. If I can't
Okay.
see, I can't see.
Oh, maybe you'll remember. Okay, so what I see in number 3 from Melanie's document is a number of things from group 7. And group 7, chapter 7 in the original document has to do with the building mass and scale. So she says for number 3, avoid the creation of large unused, okay, wait, first of all, back up. Oh, I already said this. Keep every built structure modest and simple. Okay. So number 3 from Melanie's is avoid the creation of large unused underfloor areas. When locating floor area below grade, minimize the visual impacts. Buildings should relate to human scale. A building should appear to be no more than 2 stories in height. She also has things from the series of 8s. The 8s are use restraint when introducing variation in building planes, use simple roof forms. A roof form should be in proportion to the scale of the building. Roof eave lines should appear low in scale. So she's got all those from the end of chapter 8. And then one from chapter 9, keep building forms, materials, and details simple and visually restrained. And then farther down in 9, locate and size window and doors to achieve a human scale. And then skylights should not be visually prominent from the street. And I think that's it. So that's what she has in 3. So it's kind of a smattering of different things that have to do with scale and skylights and windows and things like that. What I put, and Doug agreed with, was keep every built structure modern and simple. I put mostly from chapter 8, a building form should appear similar to those seen traditionally. Use restraint when introducing variation in building planes. Use simple roof forms. A roof form should be in proportion to the scale of the building. A roof eave line should appear low in scale. So this is that famous modest and simple, and what does simple mean, and how is it applied? And is it applied in a way that is in some way undermining historical details that we don't want to have? So let's open up number 3, keep every built structure modest and simple. How do folks feel about
Just kidding.
anybody from the audience want to comment on that one?
Well, I'll pipe up. It's Carolyn.
Okay, Carolyn, thank you.
To an architect's mind, the word simple connotes a big box shopping center. And I think in Carmel it would be, we're not trying to get simple design. We're trying to get authentic, beautifully designed, craftsman style. None of that is simple. So that, I think, I think we could pick a better word.
How about understated?
Understated, yeah. Modest, understated.
Well, I mean, even that, it's like diminutive to say those words. What we really want is for people to design gems, beautifully designed, small-scale buildings. I think it's really more about scale than simplicity.
So let me remind folks, I do have a fairly good photographic memory of the illustrations that were in the original document 20 years ago about how simplicity was illustrated. Now, maybe this isn't the right word. Maybe we do or agree or disagree with this type of simplicity. But what the original document said, and what this public, as far as I understand, at least certainly this is my opinion as well, have said, is that things that are overly busy for busy's sake is not what we're after. We're all after authenticity. We're after sort of genuine, authentic looking forms. So for example, a lot of buildings, I think in the 80s and maybe even up to today, have kind of random variations of even modern simple buildings none of us may like, have kind of constantly shifting materials, constantly shifting planes, no sense of coherent detailing. And when I believe Norrie Winter's company illustrated the principle a while ago, it was showing that instead of having 12 different little dormers and poke outs on your building, you should have 2 or 3. So it wasn't really about detailing, at least in most of the illustrations. It was about how busy is the form, how many turrets and things. One turret on a building that should have a turret would make sense, but if you put up 10 turrets, you've done something very weird and not authentic. So I don't know if simple is the right word, but I believe that's what the original document is after. Does anyone have any suggestions of how? Because I don't think, because I've read that thing so many times, I don't think, I know other people do, and I take your point, Janice, and I take everybody's point. I don't think of a box when I think of that word, but the fear is that some people do.
Well, a storybook house, one of the Comstock homes is anything but simple from an architect's point of view.
But see, I think if you look at the illustrations of the document, it's, we're talking about a triangle, maybe an L-shaped plan, but not a crazy plan and crazy things pointing all different directions. It's simple in its form, but not in its detailing, I think is what the original document was saying. But David has his hand up. Come for it. I mean, there must be a way to solve this linguistically. We'll see.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a word problem because I was at a meeting where they were looking at one of the houses that needed to be approved, and it was fairly simple in its design. It had 2 dormers and a garage that came out fairly, normal roof pattern and everything, and it had upstairs. It had like a little small glass doors, like French doors, and it had a little window, and it had a little Juliet balcony made out of rail over the French doors, and a little window box underneath the other window. Well, the planning department said that it's not simple enough, and they said take off the railing for the Juliet balcony and the window box. But if you take those things away, then it didn't have its charm anymore. And so I think that's the concern that we have, is when that word is thought of. It's not so much like anybody's trying to do anything to anybody else, but when that word comes across, it is such a broad term and it's so subjective. But I liked one of the words that you came up with, which was coherent.
Coherent, yeah.
I thought that was a very interesting word.
But that comes up under 6, which is design every property with authentic and consistent details. I mean, coherence is kind of part of that. It's not that exact word, but Carol, come on up. I see you in the wings.
Thinking of one more word, I agree with what Carolyn says, and I get why they said simple, but I don't think they meant it the way it's been interpreted. Well proportioned, I don't know if that would get at it. So if you have 12 dormers, it doesn't work because it's not well proportioned, but 2 dormers is. If you have a long straight, you don't want a roof that's just straight for several yards with nothing else going on. So that might be a word we could use, well proportioned.
And I'm looking down at the subheadings to Norrie's original work, and I see use restraint when introducing variations in building plans. Restraint seems good, but would that get to but I wanted the window box and that's unrestrained? What do you think? We don't know.
Up to interpretation.
Yeah. Well proportioned. It's a tough one because you see, if you look at 8.1 through 8.5, which you can't see right now, but it's all about whether it's overly complex in the big moves. Is the roof overly complex in terms of its big form? Is the volume overly complex? But it's not about window boxes. So I don't know. Keep going.
Well, I was just wondering if we took out simple and we just left modest, would that actually be sufficient to really do what we want to do? We don't want over-designed structures. We don't want things that are ridiculous. So would modest be enough to, I mean, that's still open to, it's very subjective as well, you know, but it sort of is what our community seems to look and feel like, is a modest community. We're not flashy, you know, so to speak. So that would sort of be the antithesis of the flashiness, showy, you know, too much kind of thing. So maybe if we only use that, might be helpful.
I mean, what does the committee here think?
I think,
Go ahead, Don.
I haven't frankly liked any of these words except restrained.
You like
In place of
restrained?
simple. I think the term simple has served the community very well in our previous history. And,
Has or has not served us well?
Has.
Has, okay.
And I think it's a very simple concept. But if anything, restrained is the closest thing, I think, to. We've already got modest in there. And another adjective, I think, could be restrained.
Mm-hmm. And you think modest is fairly unproblematic?
Yes.
Okay.
I do
Or
too.
this
I
side?
think the antithesis of simple is striving for effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what you want to avoid. Now, I'm not proposing we use that word, but as an architect
Right.
and a critique, I can cite that whenever I see it, when somebody is striving for effect.
Yeah. Or overly complicated, or, what were you going to
That's what
say?
modest and restrained covers that.
Contrived.
The current guideline says simple and restrained character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay?
so let's use restraint.
Restrained is better than, obviously, I mean, this is like a boots on the ground research. If you are witnessing these meetings and people are using simplicity in the wrong way, then that is a problem, and we have to try to fix it. I don't go there in my own head. I don't see it that way, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and Doug, what are your thoughts on that one?
No, I said simple and constrained.
Oh, and restrained, modest and restrained.
And Madam
Okay.
Chair, looks like you got somebody's hand up on the Zoom.
Somebody's- Okay, Stefan, maybe?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead. We can.
Hello. I was just listening to the conversation, and I did go through a approval process where simplicity of the roof became an issue, and we had to redesign the entire roof because of that. So I'm also confused by the meaning of the word simplicity. But what I wanted to say is that I think the reason why we consider certain things good and modest is because we understand their functionality. So if we only have one skylight, we understand that the reason is to get light in, or we have one dormer or two dormers. We understand that that's the purpose of it. And that's why we accept it. When somebody has 10 skylights or 11 dormers, then it's just an excess that we don't understand the practical application of it. And I would love to have this element of practicality embedded somehow in the language. Because I think that is where the reason why these old houses are so nice and so efficient, because people did not have so much money. They basically did only the necessary stuff to bring light in, to bring air in. But now we have a different situation where people basically come with a big budget and they can afford to build 10 dormers if they want to, and they don't even think about the fact that they don't need 8 of them, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that is the one element that I would love to have somehow included in the language.
Mm-hmm. It certainly relates to authenticity, but also I think, yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about that with Nori. Nori has assured us that he's working on language that will keep people from doing these crazy little sort of palpitations on the facades that just like, oh, I'm forward 1 inch, I'm back 1 inch, this is marble, this is brick. So yeah, the relationship of form and function is an age-old principle that's nowhere in here really. The expression of function, which it's a modernist notion, but it's also, as was just said, it's an old-fashioned idea as well. It's things are there because they're needed to be there. Okay, but let's go back, if we can, to the actual support of this, which is keeping every built structure, let's say modest and restrained as a working language. And under that, as I said, we have some things about Well, there's definitely language in Chapter 8 about restraint when using variation in building planes. I just said that. Simple roof forms, or we could say restrained roof forms, proportional to the scale of the building. Low scale of eaves. So that's the eaves, not the pitch, but just having things, stories not be excessively high. And then Melanie had added doors and windows achieving a human scale. And skylights not being visually prominent. And that is all, that's stuff from Chapter 9. And I think I put that with authentic and consistent details, but maybe it's more with modest and simplicity.
Well,
So
I think,
things-
but like I said before, I think that some of these things can go two places.
For sure. So there's not that much deviation there. And I don't see, I'm going back to Carolyn's. Okay, she's suggesting that's all under architectural heritage, restraint. Okay, that's possible too. But that leads me to principle 4, which is retain and build upon. And Don, you had some comments. Don never liked the word official architectural heritage, and neither do I actually in retrospect. No. But you had other ideas like retain and build upon Carmel's established or recognized architectural heritage. Do you remember what you said?
I don't recall exactly where I came
Well, what do you
down.
like now, as of today? Established architectural heritage, recognized architectural heritage? Any other thoughts come to mind from anyone?
Probably recognized pretty good.
Recognized is good. I mean, I think that this is something we've heard this today, just that people, this idea of old Carmel, or like how do you capture this notion that we're building on something that already exists, not just the forest, but something in the built environment that we're building on.
Can I ask her off?
Yes.
Or maybe, I mean, do you need that qualifier on there? I mean, architectural heritage,
Is
to retain and build upon Carmel's architectural heritage. I
That's
mean,
enough.
because even if you say recognized or official, like what are you pointing to? Like where is it recognized at? What is the official?
Maybe Catherine's work that she recently did.
Well, if you want to do that, then I would say build upon the architectural heritage recognized in the city's historical context statement.
Recognized.
So it's either, I mean, I think that the qualifier maybe isn't needed just from,
It
code
could be
practitioner's perspective. It's a word that leads people to believe there's a definition or a place to
Somewhere.
look for that recognition of heritage.
Well, and why don't we ask ourselves that question? Because one of the reasons, if I recall our discussion, and one of the reasons that came up, recognized architectural heritage, is because when we first tried it without an adjective, people thought, well, as soon as something's built, isn't it part of the architectural heritage? That would go to your, fear of the plain box. So recognized gives you that wiggle room to maybe expand on that in the body. And I think that's what we discussed last time and then we didn't resolve what would that mean. So it could mean, for example, we have a very expansive architectural record. And that wouldn't really cut anyone out, I don't think. But it's certainly, except it would probably cut out people who just built something that doesn't go with anything that the state or the country has recognized as a style, right? People can build anything, they seem to be able to build anything they want, doesn't mean it's part of a recognized style. So that was the fear on the committee. Tell me your thoughts about that now, Dawn. I'm gonna start with you.
I'm sorry.
Can you imagine, do you think it's important that if you have, it doesn't have to be in the statement, but in the language that supports the architectural heritage, should it be the architectural heritage that we have a record of? Meaning that, again, it's a very, I don't know how many categories, it's dozens, scores of categories of styles and stuff that have been recognized by the state of California and by Carmel, sometimes both, sometimes either. Do you think that we need to be building upon that recognized architectural heritage, or anything that people have gotten away with here? I think that's a question. How official do we want that? Doug is saying he's not sure.
I'm leaning, by the way, toward established now.
Okay.
Is enough right there.
Established. So the question remains, established by our government, by the government of California?
No, I
and
think it's established just by history.
by history. Okay. So when someone establishes a big box on my block, is that now part of the architectural heritage of Carmel?
Not at all, no.
Okay. So that's the question I think we need to ask ourselves. How do we support, what do we mean by that, and how do we support it? I'll throw out as something to argue about that we do use the, what was
It's the historic context statement.
the historic context statement that is being in the process of being updated by the staff now. So
It's been adopted.
it's been adopted.
Yeah.
I thought there were different phases that,
Phase one, the update has
Yeah.
been adopted, so we want to take it a step further and update the rest that exists for the same formatting.
yeah.
So that'll be on the budget for next year, but
Yeah.
it's adopted, and yeah.
So far, what you've done has been
Mhm.
adopted. Yeah, so that is an established architectural heritage. It's updated by the staff as they get to it and as they get funding.
Excellent.
That's a good foundation.
Excellent, yeah.
Melanie likes it. What do you, Doug?
Yeah, I agree.
Don?
Yes.
Okay. How about you guys?
I know the updates were 68 to 88, I believe, and it included ranch style and flat top roof houses. And so there's a danger that the old traditional Carmel, it will not be restricted to that. It will include, in 20 more years, it'll include probably modern boxes. That's my fear. So we need to somehow, I would hope, describe traditional Carmel as unique in its character from other cities.
Would you agree that it's, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't agree with this, Carol, but it's more restrictive to at least have established styles than anything anyone builds? So like I said, my example, that someone built something that's not part of an existing style, it's not on the historic record, but once they build it, to your fear, 20 years from now, someone could recognize that style, but they haven't yet. So
Not yet.
you couldn't replicate that. You'd have to build upon styles or heritage that's actually accounted for in our historic resources statement. It's a
And-
little bit better than doing anything you want.
It's a little better. It's not probably
It's
best.
not as good as you like,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But you're at least preferred to nothing, it sounds like.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
That's right.
So that's at least a sort of,
And the other thing I wanted to mention from our prior conversation was the word restraint, I think, could also be misinterpreted, just like simple could be misinterpreted. That maybe you had used a word that I thought encapsulated better what we were talking about, overly something, you said.
overly contrived?
Something like that.
Contrived?
Yeah, something like that.
Avoid?
Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. I've written it down. We're going to keep a running list.
So, Madam Chair, if I
Yeah.
could, just,
Yes.
I know sometimes I'm the pain in the butt with the
Go
clock,
ahead.
but it
Yeah.
seems like this exercise is turning more into rewriting the six
I
guiding
agree.
principles
I agree.
than going through the
The
exercise
organization.
that you had intended. So, we typically have a 2-hour meeting that would put us at 4:30. I can support till 5. I do need to leave at 5.
Okay.
So I'll leave it up to you and the rest of the committee. I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, because there will obviously be time to edit and change the 6 guiding principles as
Thank you.
well.
That's a great reminder. Thank you.
Could I
And-
interject? By the way, maybe I've not been doing my homework. The linkages, when will those show up? Will we see those someplace?
The linkages for,
The other documents between
Yeah,
regulations?
between what we're writing, you said there will be these linkages.
oh yeah, those you'll see where those will live in the draft. So they may not all be live, but you'll see there'll be a little note that says link to this document will go here, link to this document will go here.
I see.
So it'll be in the draft guidelines.
So if we move on to number 4, which is retain and build upon, build upon it, we're not moving on, but I was only able to come up with a few, in fact, 2 things that related to the architectural heritage. And that's kind of weird. I think one of the benefits of thinking about this document organizationally is to see where there might be the need for more support for these principles. So if we believe strongly that the heritage of our architecture should be respected, and I'll see what Melanie came up with, but diversity of architectural styles is encouraged, is 9.1. Keep building forms, materials, and details simple, but we're probably able to change that, and visually restrained. That has to do with our architectural heritage. Melanie added, building details should be used to provide interest and not exaggerate the scale of a building. She added, a building form should appear similar to those seen traditionally. That's from 8.1. I guess that should be down there. She's right about that, I'm sure. Building details should be used to provide interest and not exaggerate the scale of a building. That has to do with being contrived. And that's pretty much it. And what I would say is that there is not much support in our current, this is what I learned from this exercise, is there's not that much support. It's a principle we strongly believe in. All of us on the dais, everyone we've heard from, is that we should be designing new buildings in the context of the older buildings that are here. And yet, there's only a couple of principles, a couple headings or topics that relate to actual heritage of the existing architecture. And I think that there's not much more to, unless you guys have comments about that, I feel like that's almost a comment for Nori for staff to take a look at and just see, is there a way we can make, maybe this is an area that needs additional support?
Possibly. I was looking through the list as you were speaking and thinking in my head the conversation we've had now a few times about how there isn't just one category that lines up with one guiding principle. So I'm looking through some of these other things, and some of the form things, like all of the 6s, for example, facilities for parking should not dominate the design of the house. That's historically, that was done for those things like that we talked about, practicality, and a garage was small and separate from the house because cars used to catch on fire and they weren't. So things like that, those are historic design elements of historic houses. So I mean, I would make the case that 6.1, for example, also relates to number 5. So I think that there are more in there. But we can take I hear what you're saying. We can take a look at ones that speak specifically to
heritage. Architectural heritage.
Yeah.
I think that,
Yeah, could I say something? It's
Yes.
Carolyn again.
yes.
I think this might be a really good time to talk about scale. In my experience, the old homes were small relative to the lot size, and that could have been for many reasons. But the biggest change I've noticed in 65 years is that the houses have ballooned, and so relative to their lot. And I overheard earlier somebody say a 45% lot coverage is allowable, FAR, which is huge, that's a big number. So at what point, and I think this ties into Old Carmel big time, is at what point do we discuss maybe decreasing the allowable FAR or lot coverage? I'm not quite sure which one Carmel has, but I will say that 45% is a big number. I've been working in Marin for years, and we jump up and down if we get 35%. Usually it's 30. And that keeps the houses smaller in scale, and that's a huge word, scale.
So we have two.
Okay, so I was
ahead.
someone just texted me, and I guess we have a city council closed session at 4:30. But let me go just check and make sure
Okay.
if they're going to use the chambers.
Oh, would they come in
You
here
guys
for
continue.
that
Yeah, we got
instead of
10
the basement?
minutes. Yeah.
Okay, well, that would be interesting.
They could join us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the way, again, I think that we've got a lot of principles that relate to subordinating, they relate to scale. We have every built structure within its neighborhood context. We have keeping building structures modest.
Yeah, but we don't have any.
What we don't have is architectural heritage in this document. From what and Don, you think about it too. All of us up here, we do not seem to have a lot on how you honor the architecture. And by that, I don't mean scale. I mean style or design, not the tradition of design. This whole document is called Design Traditions. But the tradition of design is not just the kind of mechanics of how big is the balloon that you're allowed to build. It's what is the craft, what is the overall design, and does it fit into the history of this town? So if that's what heritage means, is the history, and that I think means the stylistic approach, because everything else that we've talked about is covered in other areas, but the stylistic approach is barely touched on in this document, I think, relative to, it's something I've noticed. What are you going to say, Doug?
Antiquated architectural design?
Antiquated? Yeah.
That sort of goes beyond historic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're talking about what would support that? What would we require that refers to the heritage of those recognized styles? And that is not here, I don't think. And Nori, if I had time, I'd put you on the spot, but I don't know, is the council coming in?
So they are going to come in at 4:30, so they have closed session that starts, but they have to open the meeting in public, take public comment. Yeah, because we had this meeting from 2:30 to 4:30. So,
Right. So it would have worked.
Yeah. So I suppose we have a few options. We can.
Go out to the park.
We can't do that because we noticed the item for
Right,
here.
no, I'm
So this is
kidding.
where I guess we can just try to figure out all of our calendars for like tomorrow or Wednesday. I mean, tomorrow's city council, Wednesday's planning commission.
Oh, Lordy. I'm going to think of some, and we didn't get to the, future agenda items. What about,
Thursday can people get together Thursday?
what about a Zoom meeting? That's
We
another.
could do just totally Zoom if you wanted. That is absolutely possible.
If we do each of us Zoom, I think we miss stuff. I don't know, it's not the same.
But I mean, this is, it's too much, it was always too much to handle. We tried to do the landscape ordinance, really, which should have been its own meeting. So, my recommendation is that we see if we can get a Zoom meeting that requires less.
Thursday at 1 o'clock, anybody? Does that work for anybody?
I can do that.
3 hours on
What
Thursday
day
at
are you
1.
talking about?
This
Thursday the
Thursday, the
9th?
9th at 1 o'clock.
I can do that.
Friday?
Thursday.
Thursday at
1 o'clock
at
p.m.
I
1?
don't think I can do Thursday.
I'm out of town on Friday.
I can do it Friday.
But this is Zoom, so does that make it any easier? Any
No.
time on Thursday? What about Friday, Brandon?
Friday could work. I could do Wednesday morning, Zoom only, even though that's planning commission. I think I can carve out a couple hours Wednesday morning this week from, say 9 to noon or 9 to 11.
I can do that.
Here comes the mayor.
We're almost done, Mr. Mayor. We know you like to start on a punctual manner.
9 to noon or 9 to 11, you said? So
Yeah.
I have another meeting then, but if we did a short meeting at 11, from 11 to 12, I could do that. Can people do that? So that's Wednesday
gonna-
morning from 11 to 12 on Zoom?
Can we realistically get done, though?
I think we can, actually, in an hour, if we know that
Yeah,
we're...
we're almost done. I mean, we need to get
Yeah.
through, I really want, actually, you guys might have a draft by that day anyway.
Exactly.
We're
Yeah.
talking about Friday?
Wednesday
No,
now,
Wednesday,
at 11 o'clock.
11 to noon.
On
To
Wednesday?
fit- Yeah, yeah?
Here.
Or Zoom.
Zoom. It'll be a
Zoom.
Zoom meeting.
Can we do it here?
I don't think so. Brandon, you can't do it here, can you? 11 to noon?
Sebastian, are you able to support Wednesday at 11, this Wednesday at 11?
much more effective
It's easier, yeah.
In person.
in person.
Yeah, he just wrote me back and said, sure. Okay, yeah, let's go for it. Let's go 11, let's call it 11 to 12:30, just to be
At
safe.
City Hall.
Yep, City Hall, Zoom meeting. I'll send out, I mean, we don't have to do anything because we're continuing to a date certain. We don't legally have to do anything, but I'll get out my constant contact, put something up in the post office, lickety-split, so at least people are aware.
That's good of you. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, everybody, for
All right, gang.
tolerating all this. We're going to get through it in the next hour of the next, part 3 of meeting 1 of
See you
the new
in
year.
2 days.
So the meeting is continued thrice now.
No.